Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Siegel. I am a professor of psychology over at Claremont Graduate University in California in the United States. Before I begin, I just want to start with a sincere thank you for Mel and Barbara for putting together this incredible network, this incredible week of talks, and just sincere appreciation to both of you for inviting me to speak with this phenomenal group of people that you gather together. So thank you, thank you, thank you. While we're on the topics of thank you, you know, projects such as this are never a single person project. I might be the one presenting today, but I am part of a phenomenal team of collaborators from many different places. Just want to acknowledge them quickly now, and I'll bring up their names again at the end. New Mexico Donor Services, the New Mexico MVDs, my colleagues and phenomenal students at Claremont Graduate University, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HRSA. Thank you so much for all the support, all the guidance. And again, this is absolutely a group project and the result of the hard work of very many people. As many of you know, especially if you've seen other presentations, there is a shortage of organs available for transplantation. In the United States, 22 people die every day due to the lack of organs that are available. And there is well over 100,000 people on the waiting list in the United States right now. All of those people just looking for a viable organ for transplantation, which is what brings us all here together today. I think we all realize that if we can increase the number of organs available, we can absolutely save lives. Now, in the United States, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMVs, is where 92% of all registrations happen. When just about every person goes for a license or renewal, anything along those lines, they, in most places, will be asked or be given a place to note whether or not they want to be an organ donor. And due to all that, not surprisingly, as I noted, 92% of registrations occur there. But also, it's not surprising that so many scholars and practitioners have done research and theorized and done experiments, really trying to, social science experiments, really trying to figure out whether or not there are ways that we could intervene in the DMVs to increase that number even higher. However, even though there have been a lot of successes, a lot of phenomenal DMV-based interventions by fabulous scholars and practitioners, there have been some DMV interventions that were very well implemented by very good people that failed, that did not lead to an increase in registration rates. And recently, there have been a couple that led some people, scholars, practitioners alike, to say, is this where our resources should be going? Should we really be putting our resources into the DMVs given that some interventions fail? And the big thrust of today is that we think the question isn't, are DMV interventions good or bad, but rather the question is, when will they succeed? Or put differently, what are the key components that will dictate whether a DMV intervention is going to succeed or if it's going to fail? And while there may be many different components of an intervention that can matter, what we're going to talk about today is messaging. The words that you put on the posters, on the billboards, on the flyers, on the videos. The messages, and not only the messages as far as focus on A or focus on B, but how you convey the message. Here's an example of the importance of messaging in a different context. We did a study over a decade ago where we put kiosks all over different places in Arizona with a phenomenal group of people at Donor Network of Arizona, Sarah Pace Jones, and others. And what we did was there were kiosks, and essentially at the top of the kiosks were different posters. Some posters focused on an efficacy appeal, some on a dissonance appeal, some were on a different type of appeal. We had 4 different appeals in all, but what we found is that the kiosk with the efficacy poster on top of it had twice as many registrations as the kiosk with the dissonance poster. In other words, it wasn't do kiosks work as an intervention, rather it was the posters that doubled the rates of the kiosk. The right message approach doubled the rates of registration. Beyond that, even within the efficacy appeal, so the efficacy appeal overall, and we'll talk about this appeal soon, was the most effective. We're going to use it again here. But another thing we found was that one type of efficacy poster led to twice as many registrations as another efficacy poster, twice as many. So what this tells us, again, is that the question isn't can DMV interventions work, or it may not be the question of whether or not they can work, but rather what messages will lead to success and which messages will not. That is what we are here for today. So the goal, as just noted, is really to see the role that messages can play in the success or failure of DMB-based donor interventions. Again, a big thrust of today is the idea that it's not can DMV interventions work? Are they successful or not successful? But rather the right question is when will they be successful? Under what situations will they be successful? And we think the messaging plays a very large role, but does it? We don't know. There have been very few, if any, DMV-based interventions that experimentally compare different messages. So whether or not the messages will matter in this context, we don't know, but we absolutely think it's essential to know this before a decision is made about whether DMV interventions should continue in the future or whether they should go away and resources should go elsewhere. So what was our approach? Well, since we do want to see if the message matters, and we know that one message appeal can double the rates of another, we use 3 different message approaches in the current study. Beyond that, for most of those, we used more than one type of implementation. Why? As we mentioned, one type of efficacy appeal led to twice as many registrations in the kiosk study than the other appeal. And the other thing, as we'll talk about, was we did 4 different studies. Replicate, replicate, replicate. And we're going to talk a lot, certainly at the end, about why this is so important. So what were the 3 message appeals? Well, we used efficacy, altruism, and vested interest. By efficacy, we're talking about a person's belief that they could complete the act they're thinking about engaging in. In other words, for organ donation, more specifically for donor registration, do they believe they are capable of registering? Now, a couple of prior efforts, there haven't been a lot of them on this, but there have been a few really good ones, have focused on things such as telling people, informing people how easy it is to fill out the donor card to make sure that wasn't a barrier. We took a different approach and we focused on eligibility. In other words, we wanted to make sure people knew that they were eligible to register. In other words, they're not too sick, they're not too old, nearly anyone can register to be a donor. And this was the approach that worked the best in our kiosk campaign. Another approach we used is one that's been used worldwide is altruism, really zooming in on focusing on be a donor so other people's lives can be saved. You can save people's lives, register to be a donor, do it for the good of others, is altruism. Vested interest is an approach which has actually rarely been used. And what vested interest approach is about, it's based on a theory, vested interest theory, oddly enough. And what this theory basically says is people are going to be most likely to act on their attitudes, in this case, act on the positive attitudes towards donation that so many people have, when they are vested in the outcome, when they have a stake, when the outcome is personally relevant and important. Now, typically, this is a negative for organ donation in a lot of ways, because when you're talking about non-living donation, people are not alive when their organs get used to save lives. However, there is a different way to look at vested interest, which is the idea that if it's personally relevant and important to a close other, to your family, then you do have stake in it, which led us to take the approach of focusing on the positive experiences of afforded to donor families. Now, in the US and possibly worldwide, let me hop over here, thank you. The organ procurement organizations do a lot of things for donor families. They give them grief services, give them information about funeral homes. They also do ceremonies where they honor the donor families and many, many other things. Also, a lot of families of organ donors, they report all the excellent feelings they experience as a result of their loved one being a donor. In other words, they feel pride that their loved one was registered and that their loved one saved someone's life. They feel good and a sense of warmth knowing that their loved one's organs are still on the planet and being used to save someone else's life. It's like their legacy gets to continue. Now, even though when we ask the general public about the value of these benefits, they think they're very in favor. They think they're very valuable. The vast majority of people in the United States are unaware of these benefits. And what we basically found out through a study is that when you tell people about the benefits of donation, to the family, their intentions to donate increase. How do we know? Well, we did a study. Basically, we randomly assigned people to hear about all the benefits, both the emotional, the warmth, the pride, as well as things like grief services and the honor ceremonies. And it turns out people who were randomly assigned to hear about those benefits had greater intentions to donate compared to the people who didn't. So that is the vested interest condition. So we did 4 different studies. As we mentioned, we did a lot of replications. And as you see, we started in December of 2017 and went into February 2020. Now, this timeline is going to come up later on where we talk about study 4. So now, what do these posters look like? Well, we had, as I mentioned, efficacy, altruism, and vested interest. Now, one thing we took a lot of care with was to make sure the posters looked as similar as possible. And I'll go back to the efficacy, but as you can see, same color scheme, same font, mostly the same people. And this was very, very important because, for example, if the efficacy posters were blue and the altruism were red, and the altruism worked better, it would be very reasonable to say, well, those may have only worked better because they were red. So we really tried to minimize the number of rival hypotheses. Now, as you see, efficacy, I registered to be a tissue donor because anyone can. If you look in the middle, the general message, you're not too old, you're not too sick, you are eligible. All the way over on the side, you can never be too old to register to be an organ donor. So this really tried to drive home the fact that anyone is eligible to register. The altruism, as we talked about, was all about saving lives. I registered to be a donor to save lives. You could save up to 8 lives. As a donor, you could pass on the gift of smiles, love, and laughter. So as you see, very simple message here, be a donor to save lives. And the third one was the vested interest. I registered to be a tissue or organ and tissue donor for my family. And as you see, what we do is give a bunch of information. For example, families of organ donors receive comfort, confidence, and care. All the way on the other side, who benefits when you sign up as an organ donor? Your family. Now, one thing to notice is there is a lot of information on these posters, and that was just necessary because it's not as simple to convey all the information that has to be put out there because most people, as we mentioned, aren't aware of the benefits. And as you can see, we also had counter decals. You are eligible, you can save lives, you can help your family. Same idea, same graphic, same font. We really tried to make the only differences as much as possible be the specific words that make up the message. We also had video packages. So for every condition, we had 4. They were silent commercials with text and words playing so that the MVD workers didn't have to hear the messages all day long. To draw attention to the videos, there was different trivia. And also there was a thing about real ID. Everyone in America has to go back and get a more specific form of identification. So we had some messages on that on the behest of the MVD. We're happy to do it for them, given they've done a ton for us. And if you're curious about these materials and you want to download the videos or the posters, mvddonorproject.org. MVDdonorproject.org has everything you could want about this project. Download, design, you name it. We put it up there for this very purpose. So how did it look within the MVDs? It looked like this. Again, we were so fortunate to have such incredible partners. New Mexico Donor Services and Maria Sanders and Wayne Dunlop and Michaela and their crew has such a great relationship with the excellent people at the MVD. They call them MVDs there, the DMVs in New Mexico. So we were able to put up as much material as we want. And we didn't let this opportunity go to waste. As you can see, if you walked into the DMVs, you're going to be surrounded. There's our TV up there. It's where the videos were playing with materials after material. This is a whole bunch of different MVDs. It's not one huge castle of an MVD. But as you see in all the different MVDs, there was tons of materials. Any place anyone was sitting, they were exposed to it. Very big, registered to be an organ donor because anyone can. And what we did was we switched these out. So this says registered to be an organ donor because anyone can, which is the efficacy appeal. But then when we went to the Save Lives, the altruism, it said, be registered to be an organ donor because you can save lives. So we kept switching everything out based on the appeal. And even, oh, I'm in the restroom. Let me get out of the restroom. Even in the restroom, we had things on the mirrors. So when people went there, they saw the message. And for all the messaging, it varied based on the specific condition. So, and again, MVDdonorproject.org for all the material. So what the design looked like, this was a partially counterbalanced Latin square design. And what this design does and why it's really good for a situation like this is, as you can see, for the first week, 2 MVDs had the altruism, 2 MVDs had vested interest, 2 MVDs had efficacy, and 2 MVDs had control. Then after 4 full weeks, where there were at least 4 full days of data collection, in other words, the TVs were working, it wasn't a holiday, we then switched. So let's go up to this one again, the top one. They had altruism for 4 weeks, then we took everything down, then we put up the control condition, then we took everything down, then we put up the efficacy condition, then we took everything down, and then the vested. And the idea of this design is that it really rules out a lot of rival hypotheses, because sometimes people would say, well, whichever one is up first is going to have the novelty effect. But as you see, every condition got to be first at one point, every condition got to be second, every condition got to be third, and every condition got to be last in at least 2 of the MVDs. So this was the design. Everything was beautifully counterbalanced. So great for that. But how did we actually know that people saw the messages? Now, I know you might be thinking, well, there was stuff everywhere, but we agree, but we didn't take it on faith. One, to make sure the videos were playing. All the MVDs that were participating would email us on a daily basis. If they missed, we would just get in touch with them to make sure the TVs were playing. Also, we did exit interviews. We had 2 phenomenal health educators at New Mexico Donor Services, and every day they would go to 1 or 2 different MVDs to do exit interviews. They would ask people if they saw any topics at all being advertised. If they said, yes, I saw things on organ donation, that was unaided recall. If they said yes, but they didn't know the message, or they said no, we would then ask them, did you see anything about donation? And if they said yes, it was aided recall. And again, this was to make sure we know that people were actually seeing the messages. So study 1, that was December 2017 to May 2018, efficacy versus altruism versus vested interest versus the control condition. So the first thing is, did people actually see the ads? And overall, yes. So as you see in the unaided, in the control, only 2% of people, 1 of every 50 guessed and said something about organ donation. However, in the places where the posters and the videos were up, it ranged from 11 to 17. Even more important, in the aided, although 10% of people said organ donation, even if they weren't in the condition where there were posters, maybe they guessed, they know the DMVs are associated with that. On average, about 60% of people in conditions said they saw it, or looking at together, unaided and aided combined, only about 12% in the control said they saw the donor messages, but upwards of 76, 77% of people in the intervention conditions say they saw it. So we were confident they saw the messages. Not everyone, which surprised us because it was everywhere, but that's okay. So they did see it, but just because they saw it, it doesn't mean it worked. Did it work? Drum roll. I don't know if you could hear it, but the shaking of my computer is me hitting it. Bump, bump. Yes, it did. The intervention absolutely did work, but not for all messages. I'm looking at you, vested interest. Okay, efficacy. Did it work? Yes, it did. Odds ratio 1.14, statistically significant. Altruism, did it work? Yes, it did. Odds ratio 1.11, statistically significant. Vested interest, there were posters everywhere. Any place you look, there were vested interest things at those MVDs. It had to have worked. No, it didn't. It didn't work. This study is a prime example, the vested interest condition, of the fact that you could blanket a place with posters, but it still may absolutely have no effect. And that is what happened here. Not only was the vested no different than the control, but the efficacy and the altruism led to significantly more registrations than the vested interest. So is something always better than nothing? Absolutely not. Does message matter? Absolutely. Can a message be the difference, the message appeal between whether a DMV intervention succeeds or fails? Absolutely. In other words, if we just did vested interest, we would think DMV interventions don't work. If we just did efficacy, we would think they were phenomenal. By doing all three messages, it shows us that while there might be many things that dictate success, messages are definitely one of those things. We then did study 2. Let me get my head out of the way. An exact replication. Everything was identical. Did people see it? Absolutely. Once again, it was about the same that you got here, about 7%, 8% of the people in the control, but that was up to about 70 plus of people who noticed the materials in the experimental conditions. Did it work? Depends on which one again. Efficacy once again worked. The efficacy was once again successful. Odds ratio 1.13, but altruism was not significant this time. The odds ratio of 1.08 was not statistically significant this time. It was just slightly less effective than the one in study 1 as far as the registration impact, but it was enough to make it non-significant. And vested interest, once again, was not successful. In other words, 2 replications, we could be very, very confident that that efficacy appeal can work in this context, and we could be very, very confident that the vested interest appeal did not work. Here comes study 3. Now, why did we do study 3? Because we wanted to do a conceptual replication, because as we mentioned before, what we found with the kiosk study was that one version led to twice as many registrations as another version of the same appeal. So we thought, what if that is what's going on with vested interest? Remember, I mentioned there was a lot of text on the posters. Maybe it was just too much text. Maybe it was too confusing. On the same note, maybe efficacy isn't really that great, but it was just that one specific implementation that made it great, and any other implementation would fail. So we did the same design, same evaluation, but we created a whole bunch of new efficacy messages, and we broke vested interest into 2 conditions. If it was going to fail again, our impression was that a lot of people might stay away from it if it failed twice. So we wanted to give it every possible chance to succeed, but it also meant that we dropped altruism. Sorry, altruism, but we had 2 different vested interest appeals. So it was control, efficacy, vested, vested. So what did they look like? Well, here's the new eligibility materials. Again, you can sign up. You're not too sick, you're not too old. Anyone can sign up. And there we had quotes from people saying that they were eligible. And for this one, the main thing was register. Yes, yes, you can. You're not too old, you're not too sick. Anyone can sign up. So really pushing the idea that anyone is eligible to register. One of the vested interest appeals, now look at the difference. Before, the messages were so cluttered, much more simple. And here we focused on the norms that most people agree in New Mexico, that being a registered donor benefits your family. So here, 90% agree family of organ donors may feel comforted knowing their loved one saved a life. We also let people know 80% don't know your family gets extra care for these reasons. And we put up quotes from real donor families. Register for your family. Most agree it helps my family. Really trying to make it clear to them that most people agree this is a good thing to do for your family. The other one, we called it the need approach. And what we did here, is that we tried to activate a motivational need and then satiate it with registration, essentially. So you want to protect your family? Why, yes, I do. Here's a way to prevent your family from having to make a difficult decision. Then we had the quote from the mother up there about how because she knew her husband wanted to be a donor, it made it a very easy decision on a very tough time. Also, the next one, you want to help your family any way you can. Here's a way to help your family. And then the quote there is basically, knowing he saved the lives of others helps me every day. So we're really trying to make people remember how much they love and want to help their family, and then letting them know how donation can help them do that. Register, you want to help your family? There is one way you can help them. Register, you want to help your family. Once again, you can see in the control condition, only about 14% of people said they saw the messages. In the experimental, the efficacy, the vested needs, vested norms, now we're up to about 65, 70%. So again, we're confident people saw it, but did it work? Will vested interest be successful this time and not fail again? Will efficacy succeed again? I'm curious. There are the answers. Yes, yes, and yes. The efficacy appeal, no odds ratio was higher than this, 1.21, statistically significant. Vested interest needs, 1.12, statistically significant. Vested interest norms, 1.14. Yay, yay, yay. What did this tell us? A, the effective efficacy is somewhat robust. It also showed us message implementation matters. If we only use the vested from 1 and 2, we would say stay away from vested. Only using these two, we might actually be overconfident. This just shows how important not only the messages are, but how important replications are. And we loved replication so much, we said, let's do it one more time. Now, we only had 3 months for this one, so we had to break it down to just 3 conditions. One was the efficacy. The next one, we did a combination where we did the vested interest needs and norms and the efficacy. All 3 were in the combination or control group. So did this one work? And just as a note, we used the materials from study 3. So the combo were the study 3, efficacy, vested needs, vested norms all together. Once again, they saw it. And not only did they see it, sorry, my head's in the way. Look at these numbers. It's almost the highest. The combination condition was almost seen by 90%. The control was up a little bit as well, and the efficacy was also quite high. So did it work? Did efficacy reign supreme again? No. No, it did not. Surprisingly, as you see here, efficacy odds ratio 1.06, not statistically significant. Combination, not statistically significant. What happened? We have a couple of different ideas. One, it's possible because of the real ID, because people have to go back to the DMV quicker than they would normally for the real ID in the US. We think people may have been exposed to this intervention before. As I noted, we were in the field for 2 years. So anyone, and with 8 MVDs, so anyone who went back to the same MVD again, which you typically do, you go to the one that's near you or near work, they would have already been exposed. So that could have dampened the effects of the efficacy. They already knew they were not too sick and not too old, and maybe they acted on it already. Also, the combination, remember the vested interest, we thought it was too cluttered, that original message, too much information. maybe having the needs, the norms, and the efficacy led to the same amount of information overload, and that's why it failed. But overall, this is just speculation. All we know for sure is it didn't work. So what do we do? Overall, did it work? Did it not work? How do we talk about this, given some worked, sometimes some didn't? Fortunately, there's a statistical technique called a meta-analysis, and normally it's across numerous studies and articles, but you could also do a within project meta-analysis. And what that basically does is, for example, it averages the effects of efficacy across all 4 studies. It averages the effect of altruism across those 2 studies. It basically merges everything together and says, looking at this overall, was there on average an effect of the experimental conditions compared to the control? And in short, yes, yes, yes. The efficacy was significantly different from the control on average across all interventions, odds ratio 1.13. Altruism, across the place, across the studies, 1.11, and vested interest, that one as well. Even though it didn't work in 1 and 2, it did work in 3, and we did include 4 because it was a combination of efficacy and vested. But when you combine the failure of 1 and 2 with the 2 success stories of study 3, there is an overall successful effect of vested interest. So all 3 on average cause significantly more registrations than the control condition. So conclusion 1. DMV-based interventions can absolutely increase donor registration rates. They can be successful. So if anyone hears they don't work, please speak up and go, well, that's not exactly the case. They can succeed. Now, of course, you can say, yes, 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 it is possible for them to fail as well. In other words, it's not a main effect. It's not DMVs work or don't work. Rather, it is the messaging, the appeal, the message, the words, and what you say and what you focus on. That could be the difference between success or failure at DMV interventions. And we have found this with the kiosk context. People, as I mentioned, Salas et al. In the beginning, well, he was noted on the PowerPoint, that group found differences based on the messages as well. But for the DMVs, this is a very, very rare study that in the DMVs compared messages to each other and provided, at least we believe, relatively compelling evidence that the success or failure of any DMV intervention can come down to the messages. Beyond that, it's also really important to say it's not just the vested versus efficacy. But remember, when we did vested interest in study 1 and 2, it absolutely failed. However, when we did vested interest in study 3, 2 different, the needs and the norms, both of them worked. So if someone says, you know, this appeal doesn't work in DMVs, no, it's what type of specific approach was taken. In other words, the success or failure, to say it again, the success or failure of a DMV intervention can very well be dictated by the specific messaging, appeal, what are you focusing on, efficacy, altruism, something else, and how you execute that. And the final key conclusion is exact and conceptual replications are critical. If we only did study 1, even 1 and 2, we would have thought vested interest was terrible and should never be used. If we just did study 3, we would have been overconfident with vested interest. If we only did 1, we would think altruism works all the time. Since we did study 2, we know it didn't work there. And I know it's sometimes so hard to do replications because of the resources, but please, whenever possible, I mean, this study really showed us how critical it is when you can to do replications to make sure it is not just a spurious finding. Some quick final thoughts. Again, I think the key takeaway from this is messages matter, that the question is not, do DMV interventions work or not? And it's probably generalizable. It's not, do media campaigns work? Does this type of intervention work? But it's, what do you say? What is the message? What is the implementation of that message. If nothing else, this shows clearly success or failure can absolutely be dictated by the messaging and how you approach the messaging, how you implement the messaging. Acknowledgements. A project like this does not happen without a ton of people kicking in. First, the people who worked with our core team, were part of the core team, etc., from New Mexico Donor Services, Jade, Wayne, Michaela, and Ron. And also, of course, Maria Sanders, who is a co-author on the paper I'll show next. From CGU, Jared Chapman did the videos. Dale Berger gave us statistical advice. In addition, and I'll show us on the next slide, Danielle Blazek, Maria McManus, incredible graduate students. This project would not have taken off without them. And Eusebio Alvaro and Bill Crano, my incredible colleagues who were there every step of the way as well. The New Mexico MVD, so many people, they bent over backwards for us. We cannot thank you enough. Sarah Pace Jones, who consulted with us from Donor Network of Arizona. And from HRSA, they funded it, so they gave us the money. But beyond that, Mary Ganikos, Mesmin Germain, and Venus Walker supported us every step of the way, and we cannot thank you enough either. Also, just a little fine print that HRSA asks us to add. We're more than happy to. As you see up there, it has the grant number and the disclaimer. One final thing before I depart, I am very proud to announce that the data presented here is going to be published in Health Psychology. I just approved the proofs about 3 weeks ago with my co-authors, so it should be on the theoretical newsstand any day now. So if you want a copy of this, please write to me, and up there you can see all my amazing co-authors: Danielle Blazek, Maria McManus, Eusebio Alvaro, William Crano, Maria Sanders. This is such an example of collaboration through many agencies, and there was no way any of us could not have done this without everyone else involved. So in short, thank you, thank you, thank you. I so appreciate everyone for watching this. I so appreciate Mel and Barbara for putting this together. I so appreciate all of my co-authors. And one last time, mvddonorproject.org for any questions, for any materials that you want. And if you have any questions about anything, please send them my way. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.